We talked about school violence last time. 71% of students. This is in 1999 and 2000. It's worse now. It hasn't gotten any better in the last 20 years. 71% of students in public schools report experiencing one or more violent incidents. 20% reported serious violent incidents, which include rape, sexual battery other than rape, a physical fight with a weapon, and robbery with or without a weapon. I told you about the case in Florida where the young girl was gang raped, and it was videotaped. It was live streamed over the internet, as weird as that sounds. And the individual that perpetrated the whole thing, most of the individuals that participated in the gang rape nothing happened to them. The only person that got in trouble was the individual that was live streaming the incident. And he was arrested for child pornography because the girl was only 14 years old. And of course, most of the males that were participating were underage as well, as was he. But he was charged as an adult in the state of Florida, which doesn't happen very often.
Participated in terms of what they were just there?
They were they were the ones that were engaging the young lady in sexual intercourse. As strange as that may seem, of course they had a video of it. And the only person that got in trouble was the person that was live streaming, who did not participate, by the way. All he did was live stream, and of course he was convicted of child pornography. As horrible as that sounds, it's god awful. However, only about 36% of these schools reported one or more of these incidences to the police. The problem is they try to take care of these problems. They don't want the kids to get in too much trouble. So they just let them go. My sister, when she was working in a high school in Chicago, her job was to pat down the young ladies who had gone through the metal detector at their school. So in order to get into the school, you had to go through the metal detector. This was every damn student, if you can imagine. I know. So everybody had to go through the metal detector. If they fired the metal detector, then of course her job was to find what metal they were talking about. She said the biggest problem was push-up bras have metal strips. Sometimes they're fairly thick, and of course those would fire off the thing. But what was going on for a while? They were only dealing with males. Thank you. They were only dealing with males, but what they discovered was that the females were carrying for their boyfriends or their brothers or whatever. So they had to start having everybody go through the metal detector, including their backpacks. When they first started doing it, they confiscated like 150 weapons, guns. Because people were bringing guns to school. This is a fairly gang-related area in Chicago. After that, of course, after they confiscated all the weapons, the first time people did things like they gave them to their brothers or sisters and tried to get them smuggled in that way. And it didn't work. It worked. I mean, but it took like hours to get everybody through the metal detectors, you can imagine, unfortunately. And that was her job, was patting down the young ladies. And of course, she heard some really negative and nasty things from the young ladies. February 2009, an 8th grader named Lawrence King was shot in the head and died while sitting in his classroom in Oxnard, California. His classmates were horrified. Police alleged that the shooter was a 14-year-old Brandon McInerney, who had previously taunted King because he was gay. At the time, King was living in a shelter for abused and troubled children, and he was shot and killed. This is in Oxnard, California. 2006, Warren Messner and 3 other boys beat a homeless man to death in Daytona Beach, Florida because they were bored had nothing else to do, so they decided to murder a homeless man. The oldest boy in the incident was 16 years old. There were 4 of them. The youngest was 14. The boys jumped up and down on the man's chest until they broke his rib cage. They crushed his rib cage. They were sentenced to 22 to 35 years in prison. They were tried as adults, of course. And this is the 14-year-old. He's going to be in jail from 22 to 35. And of course, the famous Columbine, the first really serious school shooting was the Columbine incident. It was in April 1999 at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. This is where my son used to live when he lived in Denver. He lived in Littleton, and he used to exercise at the park where the Columbine cross-country team practiced. So it's really kind of interesting seeing all these Columbine shirts. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold shot and killed 12 of their classmates and a teacher before they shot themselves. 15 people died. It seems to me like 17 people died, but anyway. Klebold and Harris, the infamous Klebold and Harris. But that was just the beginning. It's like the beginning. And since then, we've had all kinds of horrible things that have taken place at schools, school shootings. We had Sandy Hook, where 26 first graders, well, they weren't all first graders. There were 4 teachers were killed, but the 22 first graders were shot and killed. Something that happened something that happened yesterday. They finally got a search warrant. About a month ago, an individual went into a house, shot his mother, he shot his sister, and he shot his nephew. His nephew was 14 months old. His sister was 25 years old. His mother was 63 years old. Shot him with a rifle. Didn't say what kind of rifle though. Then he ran out into the woods, this huge woods. This is in southern Virginia. They finally caught him naked. Didn't have a stitch of clothes on. They found the clothes that he was wearing when he murdered his mother and his sister and his nephew. They found his clothes in the woods, along with the rifle, of course. And they were trying to figure out why he did this. This kid was taught Sunday school, went to church religiously. Okay, sorry. He went to church a lot, and he preached the Bible on a continual basis. And for some reason, he decided. He claimed that he started seeing demons. He said demons were surrounding his bed at night when he went to sleep. So he was complaining about that. And then the next thing they know, he kills all these people. He kills 3 people. His sister, his mother, and his nephew. Now the funny thing was, just before he shot and killed his relatives, he went up to his aunt, who lived next door, and she answered the door, and he punched her in the shoulder. He just punched her in the shoulder, like a friendly punch. And she didn't think much about it, and next thing she hears 3 gunshots next door. She runs next door, and the mother's laying in a pool of blood in the driveway, and she finds the other 2 in their bed together. He shot the mother. He shot his sister, and then he shot his 14-month-old nephew. So it's not like he shot them both at the same time. Didn't mean to shoot one, get shot. Anyway, he meant to kill everybody. 17% of high school students had carried a weapon, a gun, a knife, or a club at least once in the previous month, and about 6% of these students carried the weapon to school. And of course, that's a lot of people, that's a lot of weapons, probably way too much. That's one of the reasons why they were using a metal detector at my sister's high school. In the 2005-2006 school year, 17% of public schools experienced at least one serious violent incident at school. A smaller percentage of primary schools, 67%, then middle schools, 94%, or high schools, 95% experienced a violent incident in 2005-2006. A case in Montana, third grader, a young girl who was a little bit overweight, who was teased by her classmates, brought a 44 Magnum to school. It was a big pistol. It was a really big pistol. But it was so large that it's a revolver, and it can only hold 5 shells because the shells are so large. She brought that pistol to school, buried it in the sand, and somebody saw it. Somebody saw her bury it, and they went out and they uncovered it. And then they questioned her what was going on. She said, if they teased me at recess, I was going to kill them with this big pistol that shoots a really huge round of chunk of lead at people. She would have blown their heads off. I mean, it is a very large weapon. Anyway. That was at an elementary school in Montana. These kinds of things happen around the United States every day. On February 14, 2008, at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois, Stephen Kazmarek opened fire with a shotgun and 3 pistols in a crowd of students on campus. He killed 5 students and injured an additional 17 people before fatally shooting himself. He went into an auditorium where they were holding class. He shot and wounded the professor who was lecturing up on the stage. He was on the stage too, and then he just started shooting from the stage, shooting people from the stage. And as you can see, he was able to hit 22 students before he shot himself. He shot until the police came, and as soon as the police got there, he shot himself in the head. On the Red Lake Indian Reservation in Red Lake, Minnesota, 16-year-old Jeffrey Wise killed his grandfather, who was a tribal police officer, and his grandfather's girlfriend at their home. After taking his grandfather's police weapons and vest, Wise drove the grandfather's police cruiser to Red Lake Senior High School, where he was a student. Wise shot and killed 7 people at the school and wounded 5 others. And this is actually Jeffrey Wise right here. This is a picture of him in Red Lake. Red Lake is a Chippewa reservation. It's an Anishinaabe reservation up in Minnesota, up in northern Minnesota. Problems on the reservation too, not this reservation of course, but this reservation, the Red Lake Reservation. April 16, 2007, on the campus of Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, Sung-Hui Cho, a South Korean immigrant who had lived in the United States for 15 years, had no Korean accent whatsoever. He was a senior at Virginia Tech. He shot and killed 32 people and wounded 17 others in 2 separate attacks. He attacked one building, it was a dormitory building, and he killed 5 people in that building. Then he went to a classroom building, and he went into select classrooms and shot people. Selected them and shot them before he shot himself. Eventually he shot himself, but he killed 32 people, which was kind of amazing. He made videos before the incident.
So what does him not having a Korean accent have to do?
Oh, I'm sorry. Some people are made fun of because
Of their accent?
because of their accent, because they're different. People don't understand what they're saying. So, of course, they start speaking more quietly because people don't understand them. And then, of course, they get frustrated and aggravated. But that wasn't the case with this guy. He'd been here for 15 years, didn't speak with an accent, and he was enamored with guns, with weapons. He made videos of him with a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other, with a 9mm pistol in the other. And made videos of him being tough and he wasn't a very big person. He was kind of short. I don't know that he was bullied. Maybe it was just his interpretation of the situation.
So most of the time, nobody knows why they did it?
No. We know why the guy killed his mother, his sister, and his nephew, because demons surrounded his bed.
Is that what most of these killers claim? Is it, or?
No, we have no clue. Usually we have no clue. In this case, we really don't know. He made a video just before, that was released just after, just before he was, before his shooting.
So there's
And
no,
he claimed that he was going to kill all these people.
so there's no research or any study done to determine why these people do
Now,
this?
that's interesting because,
I mean, you would think that there would be a lot of studies done.
oh, sure, I mean, just tons of people. We try to figure out every time we see these things, why this has taken place and how we can keep it from happening again. 2 summers ago, Sarah Kine took 2 students to George Mason in Washington, D.C., and this is what they were looking at. They were looking at
School violence.
mass killers. And they were trying to determine why they did it, whether there was any connection, if there was anything that we could identify. And of course, they didn't really identify anything. That was right after the shooting in Las Vegas, where the guy killed.
Do these killers look for places where there's a large, population? Is that, or
Well,
what's
not
the
the kid in
intent
Red
of?
Lake.
I mean, what's the intent at the beginning of when these people go on this killing spree? Is it like the more people I killed? What?
Seems to be they want to kill people and they kill indiscriminately. The individual that just shot up Odessa, killed 7 people. He was fired from his job. He grabbed his pistol, got into his car. He wrecked his car, but he's shooting people on the street. These aren't even people he knows. He's just shooting anybody. And he killed 7 people and wounded 11. And he drove all the way from Midland to Odessa, which is 20 miles. I mean, he drove that distance. He stole a post office van and started shooting people. He killed the young lady that was the postal carrier.
And the intent in the beginning is that they will kill themselves, right? After they kill as many people as
Well, it's suicide by police. We'll go out in a blaze of glory, I guess, or whatever. I mean, you can call it glory if you want. Maybe that's what's going on in their minds, is that they're going to go out in a blaze of glory. The shooter in El Paso didn't shoot himself. He didn't commit suicide. And the police didn't shoot him. He killed 22 people in a Walmart. So his idea wasn't to die. His idea was to shoot and kill Mexicans. He didn't like immigrants. Of course, he's just shooting people at Walmart. I guess maybe they looked Hispanic. I don't know. I don't know if he didn't shoot anybody that didn't look Hispanic. But his whole purpose, and of course we saw that. The shooter in Pittsburgh, the one that went into the synagogue and started blowing away people, he had a video that said that he hated Jewish people and he wanted them all to die. And then he was filming himself. He was live streaming himself before he went into the synagogue. So they have all this information. He didn't die either, so we have it, and of course we can question him. But the ones that die, sometimes we have no clue. We have no clue why they did it or why they were killing people. We have the shooter in Southern Virginia, the one that shot his mother, his sister, and his nephew. So maybe we can get some information from them. That's what we hope. We hope that they survive so that we can figure this out. what in the world's going on.
You did read about the attorneys that filed the execution of stay of execution on behalf of this Navajo male that we were telling you about a couple of weeks ago,
Mhm.
who killed a grandmother and her granddaughter here on the Navajo Nation. And his scheduled execution is December 11th.
Ah, so we're trying to keep him from being executed. Okay.
Using I guess they're saying that because he's Navajo, that it's a violation of his
Civil rights?
civil rights.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. You are a sovereign nation. It's the state of Arizona, I assume, is going to
Mhm.
execute him. Okay. Or New Mexico. One of them. So we'll see what happens. Common characteristics identified in boys responsible for school ground killings. We almost never see, there are characteristics of these select individuals. Almost all of them are white. We saw the native guy that shot all the people up on the Lake Reservation. We saw the Korean individual that shot up Virginia Tech. There was a black guy in Aurora, Illinois that was fired, and then he went through the plant shooting and killing people. But other than that, it's almost everybody's white. Almost all of them are middle-aged. They're almost all in their 40s. Not the school shootings, of course, but these mass murders. Almost all of them are middle-aged. We have, it wasn't older white guys. Until the guy up in Las Vegas. He's 63 years old. And he amassed all those weapons and ammunition and then just started shooting people in Las Vegas. The people at the concert. But if we look at the school shooters, most of these individuals, more than usual experience with firearms, showing a persistent fascination with guns. There seems to be a fascination with weaponry, with guns. It's okay. I mean, a lot of times military people have the same fascination with weapons. Some people leave the military and they don't want to touch a gun ever again. Other people leave the military and they want to amass, an arsenal with all this ammunition just in case. There is a fascination with guns, and that's very common with these select individuals. Isolation, rejection, or torment by classmates. Particular difficulty relating to girls, males that don't have a difficult time talking to girls. Girls reject them for one reason or another. Usually it doesn't have to do with the fact that they wear camo every day, but maybe that has something to do with it. Preoccupation with various forms of graphically violent media, including music, internet sites, and video games. So if they listen to, what was I listening to the other day? Oh, somebody in the gym was playing this music, and I was thinking, oh my God, who is that, Slipknot? I know Slipknot. I don't like Slipknot, but and it was like they were screaming. It wasn't music at all, but so here I am, I'm listening to Barry Manilow in my earphones, trying to drown out the Slipknot. Pretty difficult. Anyway, I was thinking, wow, this guy's a mass murderer in training, I guess. Violent video games, of course. One of the things about Klebold and Harris. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. One of the things about Klebold and Harris was that they killed so many people, and it was a bit of a surprise. Normally, normally when people just shoot people, they shoot them in the chest. They shoot them in the torso. Center mass is what they call it. So when you target somebody, you want to hit them with your weapon. You want to hit them with your weapon. So with your round. So you shoot at the biggest part of their bodies. You shoot at center mass. It's very logical, but it's also not that easy to kill somebody shooting them in this portion of the body unless you hit them really good. Shoot them in the heart, shoot them in the lungs, hit a major artery. then you can kill them. It takes them a while to die unless you shoot them in the heart, of course. But these guys had all these kill shots, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. Then they realized they shot all these people in the head. So how in the world did they learn to shoot people in the head? The FBI doesn't do that. The police department, they train you to shoot at center mass. Military, they just want you to hit the enemy and knock him down. They don't want you don't have to kill him, you just have to wound him. That's one of the reasons why military rounds are so destructive. If you can hit them, you can usually, they would usually die because they'll bleed out. And that's one of the reasons that military weapons are so dangerous. But Klebold and Harris had all these kill shots, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. Then they realized that these individuals had been playing video games, and the video games, I know, video games teach you to shoot people in the head, not center mass. I guess it takes a couple shots to kill somebody center mass, but if you shoot them in the head, it's one shot, one kill in video games. This is in 1999, so we're talking about old video games. Zombies, of course, the only way you can kill them is to shoot them in the head. So they had learned to aim for people's heads. And of course, if you can shoot somebody in the head, you'll probably...
Isn't that kind of self-explanatory already?
What?
Just, if you want to kill somebody right away, shoot them in the head. You don't have to learn from a video game.
No, see, that's the way people were trained. That's the way the military was trained, that's the way law enforcement was trained. The idea, before these video games, they taught you to shoot center mass. Okay. And they've been teaching people this forever. This is the way the military trained their people, this is the way law enforcement trained their people. The problem with shooting somebody in the head is it's such a small target, and it moves so readily. It's a small target that moves. But if you shoot center mass, you're always going to hit something. You're probably going to hit something. But then they realized that that's what was going on. The FBI, they were flabbergasted. FBI snipers, before that time, if they wanted to drop somebody and kill them right away, they had to shoot them in the back of the head, shoot them right under the ear. And then they go paralyzed and they drop. But only snipers were trained to shoot people in the head. Everybody else was trained to shoot center mass. Okay. Fascination with guns, fascination with video games. And I don't know, I've never played any of these video games, but evidently some of them train you to shoot people in the head. The zombie games, where you have to shoot them in the head to kill them.
It's fun though.
Well, that's not the issue, okay? We're not really talking about fun. We're talking about killing people. Possible school reforms. These are some of the suggestions. Requiring school uniforms. Beefing up security measures. This is what they did in Texas. They had the shooting in Odessa. And hours later, on the 1st of September, certain laws went into effect. One of them had to do with school security. They said that you could have as many school security armed with weapons. Whether this means military weapons or whether it means pistols, they didn't really specify, but you have more than one security officer on duty at schools all around Texas now. Before, it was limited to 2. One in a cruiser and one on the grounds. But now, of course, they can have any number they want. Passing tougher gun laws, of course, was another answer to a question, but of course the NRA and Second Amendment people won't allow that to happen. We can't change the gun laws. Offering violence prevention programs, restricting access to violent movies, profiling to predict which students are likely to commit violent crimes. Of course, this causes some students to be unjustly targeted. You wear camouflage or you have a fascination for weaponry, and suddenly you're being profiled and the police are following you around campus. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Increasing communication between students and school administrators, because usually students have a clue as to what's going to happen next, because people talk. And of course, bragging is one of the major functions of high school kids, and so a lot of the kids know what's going to happen before it happens. The most prevalent problem with aggression in education setting is bullying. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why all these school shootings took place. Evidently, a lot of these kids were bullied. Klebold and Harris claimed that they were being bullied. Jeffrey Wise claimed he was being bullied at Red Lake. So bullying is one of the major reasons for the school shootings. On college campuses, it isn't bullying, of course. You guys don't really know each other. On college campuses, it's more likely to be date rape and hazing. Hazing has to do with joining a fraternity and being harassed by the people in the fraternity. So that's usually the reason for the problem on college campuses. Much of this aggression is unreported and hence underestimated by official records. Of course, on college campuses, there is a report that has to come out every year from each campus as to how much violence, what kind of violence there was on campus. Whether there was thievery, whether there was assault, whether there was rape or sexual assault on campus. Most of those who make implied or direct threats will not commit serious violence. And this is one of the things that we have to remember. Just because somebody is an angry person doesn't mean that they're going to strike out. Doesn't mean that they're going to try to injure somebody. In most cases, they don't. Threatening communications are made for many reasons. Angry disputes, of course, fear, jealousy, or ideology. When I was on Facebook, I was interacting with an individual from my hometown who I didn't know. I didn't even know this kid, but my brother did. He's very, very conservative, and I'm not. I'm fairly liberal. And for that reason, the individual would attack me. He would send me all of this conservative diatribe, I know. And of course, I would answer and say, this is all propaganda, this isn't going to happen. And he would say, we need to get rid of all the politicians. We need to really disrupt things. He was real happy that Trump was elected president. But he said, I don't really like you. If you ever, he had a lot of pictures of him with his sons not killing, but he had a lot of deer pictures. Okay, they had shot a lot of, that's where they got their meat. They hunted deer. He said, if you ever come back to Daleville, where I'm from, I'll shoot you. He says, you won't see me, you won't know where I am, because I've got a hunting rifle, and I'll shoot you. Well, it was about 2 months later that I went back for a ceremony, and the whole time I was at the ceremony in the middle of the basketball court, I'm looking up in the rafters, seeing if I can see this guy. Of course, he wasn't there. He was shot. So it was all talk, right? Usually that's what it is. It's just talk. He threatened to shoot and kill me, and he said if I ever came back to Daleville, well, everybody knew I was coming back, and they were admitting me to the Hall of Fame, so everybody knew. I mean, it was in the paper, it was in the paper again, it was in the paper again. My picture was in the paper. So it's not like he didn't know I was coming back unless he didn't read the newspaper.
Can't you call the police and make a report and say, like, this guy's actually threatening to
Well,
kill me?
I was thinking about that. And I was with my wife and my brother and my grandson. And I was thinking, geez, what if this guy, I wasn't worried. If he shot me, he shot me. But I was more worried about my wife and my grandson and my brother. I didn't know whether he was going to shoot us all or just shoot me. Anyway, and I did go. I I didn't have to go. And I'm standing out in the middle of the basketball court, looking, trying to see if I can find him any place up in the rafters. He wasn't there, I guess. I don't know what he looks like. I don't even remember him from high school. Zero tolerance policies are both ineffective and have the potential to stigmatize and harm mistakenly identified individuals. And this is the other problem. There are a lot of people who are gun nuts. There are a lot of people that have violent tendencies. But it doesn't mean they're going to kill people. It doesn't mean that they'll ever strike out at people. Usually they just keep it inside, and it destroys them before they destroy anybody else. Threat assessment holds more promise. It involves carefully considering the nature of the threat, the risk posed by the individual, and the needed response to reduce the risk of harmful action. And of course, this is what the police have gotten into trouble. They know that this kid has threatened to shoot somebody. They don't think he has the wherewithal. They don't think it's going to happen. So they don't do anything about it. And then the next thing they know, he becomes a school shooter. And of course the police get yelled at for it because they had an idea, they had an inkling, somebody told them that this might happen, and they didn't respond because they did a threat assessment and determined that he probably couldn't do this. A lot of times it has to do with his access to weaponry. Is he able to get a gun? Of course, once he makes a threat, then he's put on a list, and he can't get a weapon. He can't buy ammunition, theoretically. But of course, we have seen this with Klebold and Harris. They were too young to get guns. Where did they get their guns? Both of them were underage.
Their parents?
Actually, in their case, it wasn't their parents. The school shooter in Sandy Hook, his mother thought that he had an intellectual deficit, and she thought that this helped him by teaching him gun safety and about guns. She thought that was a good thing. So she's the one that supplied the gun that he killed her with. He killed her, and then went to the school and shot all those first graders. So in his case, it was the parents, but in this case, it was one of the boy's girlfriend came down went into Denver at a gun show and bought all the weapons. It was a girlfriend. In the case of, wait a minute, one of the shooters, one of the recent shooters, the one in Dayton, a friend of his, because he couldn't get weapons, a friend of his bought the weapons and gave them to him. And he's been arrested as an accessory. This is the shooting in the Dayton bar where 9 people were killed. So he's been arrested. So they have to do a threat assessment, and of course, usually these threats, 99% of the time, it's just somebody that's angry that's spouting off. Yes, ma'am?
This is just like a different question, but as far as like cell phones and stuff, what age do you think is appropriate for a child to have a cell
Oh,
phone?
wow, that's an interesting question. I have a 7-year-old grandson that doesn't have a cell phone.
Mhm.
He's like the only kid in his 2nd grade class without a cell phone.
Yeah, and my 8-year-old.
Yeah. Your 8-year-old, my
Yeah, my
grandson is
husband's
7.
like, if, you need a cell phone at 8 years old and we don't know where you're at, like, there's a problem with our parenting.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And that's a good question. See, cell phone, this is something brand new.
Mhm.
I mean, cell phones have only been around, cell phones you can actually carry around have only been around for 10 or 15 years. Before that, they were the size of bricks, straight big thing hanging out of your pocket with this big aerial hung over your shoulder. Anyway, I don't know. This is an interesting question, and this may become important in the future.
Mhm.
Kids were being mugged for their shoes before. Air Jordans. They were thinking of not manufacturing them anymore because so many kids have been killed to get their Air Jordans.
Yeah.
To get their Jordans, I know. And they're like $250.
Wasn't there the same thing with the iPhones? first came out.
Oh, is that right? People were getting killed for their iPhones?
Well, the reason why I asked this question is because like a lot of the cell phones, you can download all these apps, you know, with the have these games, and a lot of the games are violent, you know, and
Right.
children can become desensitized to
It's a good point.
violence.
You're right.
So
My grandson took my wife's phone. He got rid of all the stuff that she had on there. And he replaced it all with all these games. She's getting on her phone, she's trying to do stuff and she can't. She doesn't have, the app is gone, it's not there, she can't find it. And he replaced all of her apps with his apps.
Mhm.
So, because she gave him her phone to entertain him. I don't know. Because of that, my daughter has decided that he can't have a phone until she tells him to, because he keeps doing the same thing with her phone, getting rid of all the apps. But see, he's got a father down in Florida,
Yeah,
and when he goes down to Florida, they give him the telephone
yeah.
and to play video games, because they don't want to talk to him, you know, pay attention to him. Drives me crazy.
I think the later the better. Just no phones, no tablets.
I don't know.
Yeah. My dad limits my little sister on her tablet, and he's like, okay, like, it's been an hour, she's been on there, he takes it away, he's like, go play outside, and she takes off.
What, how old is she?
8.
She's 8.
Yeah.
So how long was it before you guys saw it?
Oh my god. Like 13, 14. I had a flip phone though. You can't do anything on that. That's all I had because they didn't have these.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah. So
Oh,
I
you're
had.
so old that you were a child when they had flip phones, okay.
Yeah, I only used it for texting and calling just in case.
Of course, that's all you could do on a flip.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not a bad idea. Maybe you can give them a flip phone for communication. but-
Isn't that what a phone is for?
Communication?
Calling?
No, it's for apps and it's for, I don't know what it's for. Who knows? Phones are for going on the internet and finding things out. You know, Google, how old is Carly Simon? You know, that kind of stuff. You don't know Carly.
I don't.
You know who Carly Simon is. She's actually older than I am, so she's like 75. It's not important.
Wait.
Carly's. Okay, so we have theories of crime and where crime comes from. Originally, of course, crime was considered, the individual was being possessed by demons, they were sinful, they were evil. That's where the whole concept of evil comes from. So every time you hear somebody talk about evil, they're talking about a really old theory of crime. This is one of the reasons that this is the rationale that Trump uses not to sign into law more stringent gun laws, because he says, well, it's just evil people, and we need to red flag these evil people. But of course, the red flag laws aren't very extensive either, so we're still not red flagging anybody, whether he calls them evil or not. And the other question is, are these people really evil? If they're evil, shouldn't we be able to identify that before they start shooting people? Or is there always a possibility we're going to identify people as evil who aren't going to kill anybody? Should we incarcerate evil people for being evil? Hitler was evil.
That's true.
But I don't think World War I, he killed people. But he actually never killed anybody. He told people to kill people, millions of people, but he never actually killed anybody. I mean, he never picked up a Luger and blew somebody's brains out. Anyway, okay, so the classical school of criminology emphasized free will to explain criminal conduct. Classical theorists also believed that punishment should fit the crime. So if you murder somebody, then you should, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Okay. The modern theories of crime were developed from the positivist school of criminology, which emphasized factors believed to determine criminal behavior, sociological factors, biological factors, psychological factors, and environmental factors. Sometimes sociological factors become the most important. Sometimes it's biological factors. Of course, psychologists think that it's psychological factors. Or, come on, is it the environment that causes these people to be evil? Is it the evil environment that causes evilness? And of course, this is a question that always comes up when we're talking about the enemy, whoever the enemy may happen to be. This is one of the questions we had in Iraq. How evil are the Iraqi people? How evil are the people in Afghanistan? When we're talking about the Taliban, are these good people or bad people? If they're bad people, can we possibly negotiate with them? Which almost happened last week. Trump said that he was going to bring these guys into Camp David and he was going to negotiate with them. Well, if they're really bad, can you negotiate with bad people? That was a question.
Two bad people negotiating with each other.
Now, we can't call our president bad. And this is a huge, huge question that we have to ask ourselves on a continual basis when we're talking about the enemy. Are they bad or are they good? Well, the only way we can fight them is if they're bad people. I mean, it's hard to kill good people, right? So they have to be bad in order for them to be our enemies. Okay. So all of this comes into play when we're talking about the military. The military has to determine if these individuals are salvageable or not. When we overthrew the Iraqi government, we thought that all the good people would come forward and they would start their own government. It didn't happen. We had Sunnis and Shias blowing each other up, blowing each other's religious structures up. They blew up mosques with people inside. The Sunnis blew up Shia mosques, the Shia blew up Sunni mosques. Because as far as the Sunni and the Shia are concerned, the Shia to the Sunni are irreligious because they follow the wrong brother, stepbrother or something. Anyway, Ali, that's what Ali is. So everybody follows Muhammad, but who came next after Muhammad died? That's what the whole argument's about. That's why there are Sunni and Shia. So who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Well, if you're a Sunni, only Sunnis are good and Shia are bad. If you're Shia, then only Shia are good and Sunni are bad. So who is actually good? Who is actually bad? The enemy are bad. The positivist school of criminology used the scientific method and the analysis of empirical data, though the conclusions are not taken seriously today. So they used the scientific method, and they proved that sometimes the environment is what causes people to be criminals. Sometimes it is biological factors that make the individual evil, makes them bad. Sometimes it's sociological factors that makes them turn to a life of crime. Okay, science tells us this. Punishment should fit the criminal, not the crime. In other words, if it's a bad guy, this is where the 3 strikes thing came from. No state had 3 strikes and you're in prison forever until California passed the law under Governor Ronald Reagan. He's the one that passed the law. And he decided that we needed to get these guys off the street. They commit 3 crimes, we need to put them in jail forever to get them off the street. So the punishment had to fit the criminal, not the crime. So if you are caught shoplifting 3 times, you're in jail forever. That's the way it works. You steal a bicycle, the last time you steal a bicycle, you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life. In California, this foreshadows rehabilitation as a correctional priority, and the intermediate indeterminate, I made this mistake while I was reading this before, indeterminate sentence as a means for achieving it. Okay. So rehabilitation doesn't work as far as this is concerned, because you can't rehabilitate a criminal. The criminal is either good or they're bad. That's what the Shawshank Redemption is all about. These individuals are evil forever. The one guy murdered somebody when he was 16 and he's been in jail all of his life. And then, of course, eventually they let him out. Most modern theories of criminal behavior are a legacy of the positivist tradition. The validity of these modern theories varies greatly, as most can account reasonably well for certain types of crime, but none explains all forms of criminality, and some explain very, very little. Is it the environment? Do we need to change the environment? If we put these people in jail for an extended length of time, does it actually help? And the answer is no, none of this stuff really fits, unfortunately. Other countries don't have the same problems that we do. The reality is, in the United States, when we're talking about criminal law, we're talking about 50 different statutes. No two states are alike. They don't even use the same nomenclature. So we're talking about 50 different ideas, 50 different courts that we're dealing with. Most theories of crime have focused on men. About 3/4 of all arrests are of men, and almost 85% of violent crimes are committed by men. What the hell's wrong with men? What's wrong with this? Hormones, testosterone. We have too much testosterone. It makes us stupid, violently stupid. Is that true? If we look at domestic violence, we actually look at domestic violence at what's going on, it's like 54% of the time it's the female that is the physical aggressor, and it's 46% men. But men are bigger, and they tend to do a lot more damage. And when they get angry, they usually do more damage. So most of the time in domestic violence cases, it's the guy that damages the female. In some states, if they have a domestic violence call, they go to the house and arrest the man. No questions that he can be the one that's all wounded. She's not hurt. She's carrying a knife. Who do they take out of the home? They arrest the man and they put him in jail for domestic violence. In some states, they arrest both of them, which gets a little interesting, especially if there's kids in the house, because they have to kids either go into Child Protective Services or a relative takes them, but you have to find a relative. As weird as that sounds. So it all depends. I know this is really strange. So usually it's men. Men are the ones that commit violent crimes. Have we had any women shooters? Actually, there was one. She killed 2 people someplace. She shot 2 people. It was over the summer. And I was thinking, wow, that's weird. This lady opened fire with a 9mm pistol somewhere. The rate of growth in the female inmate population has been substantial in the last 2 decades. Between 1995 and 2008, the number of women in state and federal prisons increased by 203%. We have this myth. All women are good mothers. That's one myth. The other myth is that women are sugar and spice and everything nice, and there's no reason to arrest them. But of course, we're getting over that. Or, when men dominated everything, when men were in charge of like everything, then we assumed that women were second-class citizens, that we never arrested them. The women were always the good guys, and men were always the bad guys. But now, of course, now that we have more female judges, now that males are not always in charge in every instance, well, why did they think that males should be in charge? Who came up with that idea? Well, sure, men came up with that idea. Not only that, but they wrote it in like Bibles and religious tracts and whatnot. Men are always supposed to be in charge. If you're a Muslim, guess who's in charge? If you're a Hindu, guess who's in charge? If you're a Buddhist, guess who's in charge? If you're a Christian, guess who's in charge?
Jesus.
I know. Who came up with that idea? Well, everybody, men, and almost every religion follows that practice. Sociological theories maintain that crime results from social or cultural forces that are external to the specific individual. They exist prior to any criminal act, and they emerge from social class, political, ecological, or physical structures affecting large groups of individuals. This is a sociological theory. The problem with the sociological theory is, what do you do when the society is tainted? When there's a problem like this? If all problems come from social class problems, political problems, ecological problems, physical structures, and large groups of individuals, who do you arrest? How do you stop this stuff from happening next? This is what happened in Russia. The Russians felt that it was sociological problems. Anybody that was against the Tsar, it was because of social class. It was a political question. So instead of arresting these people and putting them in prison for an extended length of time, they arrested these people and put them in prison for a short period of time. And then they let them go. Or they kicked them out of the country. And when they kicked them out of the country, they all went to Paris. And they all got together, and that's where the Russian Revolution came from. Lenin was in Paris. And then he went to Berlin. And of course the Germans, this is during World War I, the Germans were fighting against the Russians. He was in Berlin with the Germans. And the Germans transported him over the border into Russia. And then he became the leader of the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks means the minority party. Menshevik means the majority party. And the Bolsheviks became the majority party, and then the Reds took over. But it was manufactured by Lenin, and Lenin was in Germany at the time, in Berlin. Initially he started out in Paris, but then he went to Berlin. And the rest of it's history. So that was a problem. They weren't controlling all these people with all these negative ideas about the Tsar. They weren't executing them. They weren't controlling them. They didn't put him in prison for an extended length of time. They kicked him out of the country, and they all got together and they created the Russian Revolution. So the so-called sociological theories, they make a lot of sense. But at the same time, there's not a whole lot you can do to control a situation that is structured on social class, political aspects, or ecological aspects. It just doesn't work. Biological theories stress genetic influences, neuropsychological abnormalities, and biochemical irregularities. Note little empirical evidence that either sociological or biological theories independently predict criminal behavior. I was talking to a student about this last night. He was talking about conduct disorder. Conduct disorder, we first identify individuals with a problem when they have oppositional defiant disorder. And then they graduate to conduct disorder. If they don't improve, then they have conduct disorder. When they turn 18, then we diagnose them with antisocial personality disorder. Now, most people with antisocial personality disorder end up in jail. Well, we can't arrest, a 7-year-old who has oppositional defiant disorder. And some of them grow out of it. A lot of times when you hit puberty, all of those neurons in your brain that were telling you to be oppositional, all of a sudden you get rid of all those neurons and you change. Some kids with ADHD, when they're tiny elementary school students, when they go through puberty, they lose their ADHD. Everything improves. Everything's better. I know, it goes away. It's pruned from your brain. And now you're not ADHD anymore. Now you're a normally functioning individual without all that erratic behavior. It happens. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Anyway. A lot of times people with conduct disorder graduate to antisocial personality disorder and end up in jail. If you think of your high school class and some of the bad kids that were bad kids in elementary school, there's one sitting right there. As soon as they graduated from high school, they did something stupid and they ended up in jail. I had a student down in Mississippi who said almost all of the males in her high school class were either dead or in jail. They were dead because they had tried to do something stupid with the police, and now they were dead. Anyway, okay. Psychological theories emphasize the crime results from personality attributes that are uniquely possessed or possessed to a special degree by the potential criminal. And of course, we talk about people with antisocial personality disorder. These individuals start out as kids that wet the bed. They have a fascination for fire to the extent that they keep setting fires. They light fires to see what's going to happen next. So this is a problem. The third problem is most everybody just loves puppies and kittens and little baby things. These guys torture them. They torture small animals. They torture anything weaker than them. So they become bullies. And that's what happens with people with antisocial personality disorder. These individuals have no empathy. So they feel no empathy for another individual. I mean, if they don't have empathy for a small kitten that they just tortured to death, why would they have empathy for a human?
Wouldn't that be a sociopath?
Yeah, well, it's the same thing. Antisocial personality disorder is a sociopath or a psychopath. Yeah, same thing. You know, as much fun as that is. One is being defined by sociologists, and the other is being defined by psychologists. And then the third type is being defined by criminology. They're the ones that talk about psychopaths. But psychologists talk about people with antisocial personality disorder. As much fun as that is. Social psychological theories bridge the gap between the environmentalism of sociology and individualism of psychological and biological theories. They're all flashing gang signs. I'm not exactly sure which gang that is. That's the whole point in this picture. These theories propose that crime is learned, but they differ about what is learned and how it is learned. And of course, that is the social psychological theories that we are using today. So if you become a forensic psychologist, this is one of the things that we're going to have to talk about, the social psychological theories and flashing gang signs. Does anybody know what gang that is? East? Is that east or is that west? I think that's east. That's a West Coast thing. And here she's got a Philadelphia Phillies stocking cap on, as weird as that is. Okay.
Was that chapter 5?
That was chapter 2,
Oh. Okay.
I think, or maybe chapter 3.
I think it's chapter 3.
Yeah, it's chapter 3.
Yeah.
And this is chapter 4.
All my classes with you and the slides are all running together in my mind.
Yeah, I know. I apologize. It's not my fault. Yeah, that was chapter 3. This is chapter 4.
I do that with the online class with the cultural psychology, and then this
Yeah.
one, they kind of like, they kind
Yeah.
of blend.
They all splash together.
Yeah. You know, this morning, I was thinking the wrong class right
Oh,
I
no.
realized it. I was like,
Did you go down to 108?
I went to the GCD building,
Oh,
my
gee.
statistics class.
You know what the psychology 325, psychology, law, and sociology? Those were things that do.
I hope that they're not conflicting, that they agree with one another.
They do agree with one another, that's why it's like confusing when to like, what am I gonna comment in this class and what am I gonna comment in another class, because I don't want it to be the same thing or off of it.
One of the really serious problems that we've had lately is with the police department, with law enforcement. There's a reason why Black Lives Matter has become Black Lives Matter, because a lot of black males, unarmed males, have been killed. Eric Gardner's anniversary was a couple days ago, and they had a march in New York City. Eric Garner was an individual that was being arrested, or he was being stopped by the police. They put a chokehold on him and they strangled him to death. And they didn't even, there was no reason for them to even stop him. They were just going to question him. And of course, now he's dead. And it was a year ago that happened. So the police have a really serious problem. Our idea of the police, I was watching The Mule the other day. The Mule is about a 95-year-old man that is a drug mule for the Mexican cartels. And they stopped this one guy, and he says, don't shoot me, don't shoot me. He gets out of his car, puts his hand on the hood. They didn't even tell him what to do. He said, you know, these are the 5 most dangerous minutes of my life because the fact that I'm being stopped by police, it's the most likely time that I'm going to be killed. And of course, he doesn't have anything to do with anything. They just stopped him to check his car to find out if he was a mule as well, because he was driving a black pickup truck, just like all the mules drive black pickup trucks or something. Everybody should wear a hat that says mule on it. Psychological evaluation of police personnel began in 1916 when Terman tested 30 applicants for police and firefighter jobs. Terman is a really interesting individual. Terman was the one that was in charge of testing all the soldiers joining the Army in 1917 and 1918 to determine if they were smart enough to either be officers, be artillery, rangefinder officers, or to be enlisted personnel. They were trying to find out whether they were smart enough to be soldiers or not. And what they determined was that most of the soldiers coming out of the United States, most of the individuals we sent overseas were not real bright. The average IQ of individuals going to war in 1917 was below 70. I know. They were functioning morons, is what Terman said. Of course, the test was kind of biased. Was just a little bit biased. Terman was out of California, and he was the one that wrote the tests. There were 2 tests, one for people that could read and one for people that couldn't read. Now you would think, come on, we had public education in the United States. How in the world could somebody not read? Well, it turns out we don't have public education everywhere. We didn't have public education everywhere in the United States. We had public education in Indiana, in Illinois, in Michigan, in Iowa, but not in South Carolina and Mississippi and Tennessee and Georgia. Those individuals mostly carried guns and became the infantry cannon fodder that we sent into battle. Terman in 1917 found that the average IQ among these applicants was only 84. Now remember, 70 has always been the cutoff. Anything below 70 is an intellectual deficit. So you have to have an IQ above 70 in order to be considered normal. And even at 72 or 75, that's still pretty low, and you do have a problem. So the average was only 84. He recommended that nobody with an IQ lower than 80 should become a policeman or a firefighter. That's what Terman said. 80 is still pretty damn low if you think about it. In the 1960s and 1970s, several national commissions recommended formal psychological assessment of police personnel in all departments. One of the reasons that they came up with the Miranda law was because police departments had no control over them. The states had control. There was no federal control. So a lot of times they were torturing information out of people. If you were arrested in the South, if you're arrested in Mississippi, yeah, and you were black, you may not survive the interrogation. It happened quite frequently. This is stuff right out of South Africa, the apartheid years, when if you were black and you were arrested, you were dead. And that was the end of the story. Unless people knew who you were, If you were a famous person, like, who's the guy that became president? Who am I thinking of? I can't think of his name. Anyway, he was famous, and that's the only reason he survived. Everybody else disappeared. They died in prison. These kinds of things happened in the South all the time. And this is one of the reasons why they decided that they needed to create national standards for all of these things. So in the 1960s and 1970s, of course, all the states still had control over this stuff. So they had to agree to these ideas. In the 60s and 70s were the civil rights period. This is when we were fighting for civil rights. This is when we had people being bused into Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, and these individuals, of course, were marching for not only civil rights but also voters' rights to change. Because if you were black and you lived in the South in the 1950s and 1960s, you didn't vote. You couldn't vote. They would not allow you to vote. So there were a lot of things that were changing in the United States at the time. 1960s and 1970s, several national commissions recommended formal psychological assessment of police personnel because they had a lot of people that were fairly brutal when they arrested people. You could break somebody's arm. You could do anything you wanted. By the 1990s, formal assessment of police candidates had become routine. So it took until the 1990s to get all of these police departments standardized. So if you watch the movie, oh geez, now I'm trying to think of the names of movies. It's a Sidney Poitier movie. It's about the South, and he's a police officer from Philadelphia. And they arrest him because they found a dead body, and he's a black man that they don't know, and so they arrest him. Something of the Night. I can't think of it. Great movie, really neat movie. It's about a black town, Sparta, Mississippi. I can't think of the name of the movie. Anyway, great movie. Has Sidney Poitier in it. But this is going on in the 1960s. So if you want to know what police departments look like, watch a movie like that, because it will show you that they had their own rules. They arrested anybody that looked different. It could be a black person, or it could be a poor white person, but they were, there was no equality taking place. The police department was pretty much a social control mechanism. And if they didn't like you, they arrested you. Psychological evaluation, or they found a reason to arrest you. That's why they arrested him. He was sitting waiting for the train to come, and they arrested him because he was a black man in a Mississippi town at night. Psychological evaluation of police applicants focuses on selecting candidates who appear most psychologically fit, or on eliminating individuals who appear least suited for police work. And you'll have to admit there are some individuals that should not be policemen. I hope you've never run into these individuals. Once upon a time on Fort Belknap Reservation, this is a problem on reservations because you guys are sovereign, therefore you have your own police forces. And sometimes these police forces are not very ethical. Okay. What happened on Fort Belknap, they hired a guy that was kind of a horn dog. Can I say that? Okay. And he would, at night, if he stopped a young lady for whatever, for having a light out or having speeding, what his concept of speeding was, he would offer to either take her to jail or take her into the back of the car, unfortunately. And of course, he was a policeman for an extended length of time. Unfortunately, he was a good cop otherwise. I mean, as long as it wasn't at night, and as long as it wasn't a female, then he was a pretty good cop. But if it was a female and it was at night, all bets were off, and the next thing that happened was she was either sexually molested or something happened. He got in trouble because he started filming it on his cell phone. As stupid as that is. What a dummy. Anyway, well, he was a bad cop. But he was a good cop as long as it was a male, but he was a bad cop if it was a female. He was not suited for police work. He was just, yeah, he's not a very nice person. Most selection methods are developed to screen out disturbed candidates because it is very difficult to agree on the ideal police profile. So what is a good cop? What does a good cop look like? Do they have to be good cops all the time? In his case, he was a good cop as long as it was during the day. And actually, that's what they started doing. They didn't put him on duty at night. Sometimes they had to put him on duty at night. Everybody knew this was taking place, and you didn't want to get stopped by this guy. Well, if you were a female, you didn't want to get stopped by him. If it were your task to select police officers from a pool of applicants, what psychological qualities would you look for? One of them might be incorruptibility. They need to be well-adjusted. They need to be people-oriented. They need to be extroverts, not introverts. Of course, if they're an introvert, they become a detective because they can't really talk to people. Okay, so people-oriented, not overly emotional, of course. They need to be dedicated to their job. They need to be disciplined. They need to be logical. A lot of individuals coming out of the military already have these things. They've already displayed these attributes, except for the people-oriented part. And sometimes it maladjusts them to be in the military. The rest of it is, you know, that's what you have to learn in the military, or of course you can't function in a military situation. Police officers should be of high moral character. The police officer must treat all citizens fairly and within the rules of the law. And that's not what was happening with actually he was a friend of mine, and I didn't know if this was happening. But I thought he was a good cop. I mean, he never tried to molest me, so. Of course, I'm white, so he couldn't stop me on the reservation anyway. Reports of officers accepting bribes or framing innocent suspects is especially disturbing. He would never have done anything like that. He just was he was a pervert. There was something wrong with that guy. A police officer should be able to carry out the stressful duties of the job without becoming seriously and continuously affected by the stress. And this is tough. This is really hard. Individuals who have been in the military, a lot of times they suffer from PTSD. That's not the guy you want as a cop, because they have already reacted to high stress situations in a negative manner. And that's not something that you want. They need to be thick-skinned enough to operate without defensiveness. Policemen, at one time, if you watch old movies from the 70s, they called them pigs. And for some reason, the police didn't like that, being referred to as a barnyard animal. So you have to be relatively thick-skinned. Yet they must be sensitive to the needs of others. I had a cousin who was a police officer in Indianapolis. I think I've got him in one of these articles, because he was shot and killed in a domestic violence situation. But he was very sensitive to other individuals. He's kind of an ass, but that was to his relatives, so I'm not sure how he acted with other people. He was really a pretty good cop. And when he was shot and killed, all of Indianapolis just went insane. They must be aware of the dangers of their job, and of course, in that case, he wasn't. He went running into a domestic violence case. He thought that the lady was about to be murdered, and for that reason, he went in without backup. The guy was hiding behind the door with a shotgun, and that's all she wrote. When he shot, she was at the end of the hall, and he ran through the door he thought the guy was in the room. Well, who knows what he thought. But anyway, she was in front of him. He went to her. The guy shot him with a slug, and it actually wounded her at the same time, which was kind of interesting. We need to stop right now. Yes, ma'am.
For the police officers, that's one of the most dangerous calls to make us to
Domestic violence.
situations.
Everybody's emotional.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was watching NCIS the other night, and Gibbs reacted to a man starting to beat his wife. And of course, as soon as he did that, he stopped the guy from beating his wife, knocked the guy out. The wife attacked him because he had attacked her husband. I know, stupid stuff. We need to stop right now. Okay, I'll see you guys.